Dean Obadallah. He wants to be your Muslim friend.
Most Muslims, I know many, are great people.
Watch this.
People.
You're listening to the Dean Obadallah Show, where comedy meets politics and all things in between.
And welcome back, Dean Obadallah Show. We're live here Monday, November 4th. And guess who's in the studio? It's our friend Jamira Burley. She's back, internationally recognized speaker, social justice advocate, flying around the world, making an impact for the next generation. Also often hosts on our channel. Before that, National Deputy Millennial Vote Director at Hillary for America. Jamira, how are you? Just back from India and Brazil.
India, yeah.
Since last time.
I know.
When did you get back from India?
Friday night.
Wow. And what was the jet lag for that kind of thing?
It's horrible. I went to sleep at 4 a.m. and then woke up at 9 a.m. because they're 8 hours ahead. And so, yeah, I don't know what time zone I'm in. Well, but I'm happy to be back.
Well, welcome back. So let's talk about I have nothing fun to talk about. We'll talk about one fun thing.
Beto's out the race. That's a good thing.
Well, we'll get later in the thing. We're going to get to 2020. Beto. I'll ask you where his 2% is going to go. I liked Beto. He only came on one time, but he happened to be on a few weeks ago.
He's
He was
cute.
a nice enough guy. Really nice guy. And on gun violence issues, lately he really came into his own, but it was not getting traction. But we'll talk about 2020 race. I want to ask about this. Over the weekend, white supremacist group filmed themselves in front of the Emmett Till Memorial in Sumner, Mississippi, where, of course, there's, a governor's race going on, and I'm sure this plays to that. And they are there with their video waving flags that Southern Poverty Law Center says are League of the South, which is a white supremacist hate group. Mm-hmm. And they were saying things like, "We're all here at the Emmett Till Monument that represents the civil rights movement for blacks. What we want to know is where are all of the white people rights?"
Motherfucker. This country was built on only white people rights. Like, are you serious? And the crazy thing about the whole thing with Emmett Till, especially, we've known that plaques after plaques have been destroyed by protesters, is this was a young man who, in recent times, the woman who even accused him of whistling recanted that. And so it's like, why use that as a symbol of pushing back against, or to push back against equality for black people? It just doesn't make sense.
But to them, it goes to white victimhood. I mean, white victimhood is the mother of white supremacy for these white people. And the victimhood is, you have this memorial for Emmett Till. Where are the white people memorials?
I mean, all the Confederate memorials all over the country, the fact that we've only had white presidents up until Barack Obama, shit like that.
Like you were saying, the Emmett Till Memorial has they had to make it bulletproof.
Yep.
I'm not kidding. After acts of vandalism, including getting riddled with 20 bullet holes. In July, just a few months ago, a photo surfaced with 3 white University of Mississippi students posing with guns in front of the memorial that damaged by bullet holes. So they were bragging to their friends. So you got white supremacists, and these are young kids who are in college, the other guys, who go there and stand there with their guns showing the bullet holes they made in Emmett Till Memorial. And I don't know where it ends, because look, there's always been white supremacy. We cannot pretend Trump invented this stuff. He didn't. And maybe it's unfair to go every time I find an instance of it, I attribute to Trump. But I can't help see how he's emboldened. Like he refused to denounce David Duke during the campaign when asked. He defended both sides, fine people on both sides after Charlottesville, which we know they were not fine people on both sides. Mm-hmm. You're defending a Confederate statue. You're not a fine person. I'm sorry. You're just not a fine person. And the list goes on of him retweeting people like with white genocide. Literally a guy with a Twitter name, White Genocide. And he retweeted the guy. And he didn't just do a normal retweet. He copied the tweet, including the word white genocide, and pasted it into his Twitter handle. His tweet during the campaign. There's no games here. This is right in our face. Yet you have people going, I'm not sure if we should call him a white supremacist. I don't know what's in his heart. I know what's on his Twitter feed. I know what's in his mouth. I know what the guy's saying. Are you kidding me?
I don't need to know what's in his heart. Like, this isn't the old times we have to measure his heart against a damn feather. But what I will say is that there was an article in the New York Times that talked about when real people, or when regular people make it into Trump's Twitter feed and the impact that has. What it does have is that it legitimizes all of their thoughts, right? These are folks who for a long time didn't want to speak out, didn't want to tweet their most deepest, darkest, disgusting ideas of America. And because Trump is in the most highest office in the land, it has legitimized them. It has given them so much backbone to feel like they can walk anywhere and tell Mexicans to stop speaking Spanish, to tell black people to go back to where they come from, to be okay with children being locked in cages and separated from their families. And like, so to your point, this is nothing new. Trump has only amplified and kind of pulled back the wool or the curtain of what has been festering in America since the beginning.
And it was an interesting article in the New York Times. I saw that, how these people, the New York Times broke it down. Some were white supremacists. Some were just random people who said something nice about Trump, and he elevated their voice. And it goes on. You were talking about, brown people of Latino heritage being told, go back to your country. It was a horrible event on Friday night. In Milwaukee, the police arrested a 61-year-old man who attacked a man, Mahmoud Valalas, who got second-degree burns. He got acid thrown in his face by the 61-year-old. And I want to play the news story about it, which explains what went on. You can actually hear Mr. Valalas now, who's out of the hospital but still in a lot of pain, about what happened. So here's clip number 6, please, Matt.
Mahmoud Vialas describes the moment he says a stranger hit him with what police say is battery acid. Now, through surveillance, we're getting to see exactly what went down.
This is pretty much a terrorist attack.
In the video, you can see the pair arguing. The suspect raises his finger at Vialas, who's on the left. Vialas motions and a liquid is thrown. It happens quickly, so we'll slow it down. After the incident, the man grips his bottle and walks off.
I think I'm pissing him off because I tell him, this is my country, this is not your country, so this is everybody came from somewhere else.
I spoke with Vialas after being released from a Milwaukee hospital with second-degree burns. He tells me the argument began after Vialas parked in a bus zone, but it escalated when the suspect, who he says is white, accused him of being, quote, illegal. You believe you're a victim of a hate crime?
Yeah, I'm a victim of a hate crime because how he approached me and told me get out of this country. He don't even know my status.
City leaders say police are investigating this as a hate crime. Investigators told 12 News they arrested a 61-year-old in this case.
Thank God they don't have a gun and shot me. This is horrible. Think about it, something like that happened to my kid.
So you have this man living in fear for his kids. And I saw another interview where there were Latino people in that area saying it used to be fine to live here and things have changed. And clearly it's the times we live in where there's guys that go back to your country. It's not a coincidence when the guy, I have no doubt the guy's a Trump supporter. If I'm wrong, I will apologize. So let's just assume for the second he's at least a supporter of Donald Trump telling people from other countries or who look like they're from other countries, go back to where you come from. But the guy's carrying battery acid in a container.
It's almost like he was looking for a reason, right? What's crazy, I was talking to someone over the weekend and they made a really good point, is that when we think about the civil rights movement or we think about any of the major movements in history over the last 50 years, we only talk about the victims, right? We talked about the people who were in the forefront fighting for change. We never talk about those who lost. Right? We never talk about the white supremacist who had children during that time, who was passing down those views. And I think until we start addressing those who inherited that hate, those who are still alive, who actually fought against the civil rights movement, right? Addressing those concerns, we're never going to get to a point of real healing.
But how do you do that?
You got to start calling it out. And also, I mean, one, you have to start calling it out. But two, we need to have a larger conversation. If we had a conversation around wealth in this country and recognize that those who are most of the 1% got most of their wealth through some form of slavery or some form of inheritance through slavery, then we can have a much closer, deeper look onto why people, their views are constructed, the policies and practices they support, and also why our communities are structured the way they are. I mean, if you look at Tulsa, those people still live in Tulsa. Like the woman who, the youngest, the oldest or the only victim of the Tulsa riot just recently passed, right? There are folks who probably still live during that time who believe that that community should be burnt down. And we have yet to address those stories and those families and hold them accountable in any real way. Even the woman who said that Emmett Till whistled at her, she just recently recanted that, and there was no accountability for that.
And last time you were on, we talked about Black Wall Street and the massacre that happened there and how it's not something, I went to school in Jersey.
Yeah.
It's not something we ever learned about. I learned about it as an adult. I remember when I went to perform at University of Oklahoma or some University of Tulsa, someone mentioned something about it and I had no idea what they were talking about. So it was many years later when I saw first about it. We're not taught. I mean, it is whitewashed, our history, a lot. And there's a discomfort among certain people, certain white people, frankly, not all, who, when you talk about race, it becomes an accusation to them and not a discussion. And they'd rather just go, why do you got to talk about slavery? Why do you got to talk about civil rights? Why do you have to talk about this stuff?
You have to pull the race card.
Well, when they were pulling at the same time. And Emmett Till he was tortured and killed by these guys. It wasn't, killing him would have been horrific enough, but they tortured him as well because the idea of a black man, in their view, whistling at a white woman, which was not true, but they were looking for an excuse. Like, it seems like the guy with battery acid. If you're walking around with battery acid in a container, you're just walking around like a 61-year-old guy in Milwaukee going, I'm going to bring my battery acid with me. You never know when you need some of that stuff.
When you come across an illegal.
I don't know. I don't know. Does it get worse? I mean, do you later we'll talk about the 2020 race itself, but let's talk about race in 2020 instead, and not just the race. Do you think it gets worse between now and November 3rd, or 1 year away?
Yes. I mean, even on the progressive side, we have Pete Buttigieg saying that the reason why people aren't voting for him is because black people aren't voting for him is because he's white, or like himself pulling the race card because he's LGBTQ, and so. It blows my mind.
Jim Clyburn, though, the congressman said today, though, some black people won't vote for him because he's gay. That's what it was.
But that's also white people. That's nothing
anyone,
unique to the black community, and that's nothing unique to like that. But that also doesn't draw to the simple fact that he's done nothing in his entire campaign that actually has went to engage the black community. Even in his own city, he has lost support from the black community in the last two from the first and second election. So I think it's definitely going to get worse. I think that we're going to find on both sides individuals pulling using race as either a punchline to say that we are in a post-racial society, or they're going to use it as an opportunity to highlight that they are the most qualified person to speak on behalf of those who are the most marginalized, or they're going to use it as a way to say that that the reason why they're not being supported by a large base of the Democratic Party is because of their whiteness or the inherent wrongs within the black community.
I don't say things about a candidate to support any candidate on the show because this is truly a platform for all progressives and the supporters. I'm impressed by Buttigieg in that he's a bright guy, really bright guy.
Yeah, he's smart.
He served in the military and everything like that. There's something that I find slightly off-putting, and it could easily be overcome by him coming on the show. That's one way. But the other way is that he's a Harvard guy. At Saturday Night Live, I work with many Harvard guys. In fact, Colin Jost, who hosts Weekend Update now, went to college with the same time Buttigieg, and he plays him on the show now, and I work with Colin. When I was there, and this is simplistic, but there were two types of Harvard guys. There were the Colin Jost guys who came from like a single mom from Staten Island who worked really hard and through work and will and even some white privilege got a chance to go to Harvard. But they were still down to earth. And there were other Harvard guys. They weren't bad people, but there was an arrogance above them. They were like almost talking to me, because I wasn't a writer. I was on the production staff, almost talking to me like they were a conqueror and I was a primitive man, that they came along.
You should be
like
honored
a colonist.
to talk to them.
But they were not bad. But they were not bad people. It wasn't like they were mean or
cruel. It's a superiority of thinking they know better.
There was an entitlement. You can feel it was palpable, and it was so weird. I'm like, where is this coming from? And it was the Harvard guys versus the non-Harvard guys, and some of the Harvard guys were like Colin, the greatest guys, and others had this air. And when I see Buttigieg and some of his comments, I feel not the Colin Jost type. Not the I get more of the entitlement guys. And I could be completely wrong. It's unfair. I've never talked to him. If I had him on the show, we had a conversation.
You don't know what's in his heart.
Right. So right, I know what's in his heart. But when he says things like over the weekend, and not getting to be a two-way race, exact words, it's early to say, I'm not saying it's a two-way race. But then Heilman pushes him, two-way between who? Him and Warren. So so while he was measured because he knew it was going to sound bad, ultimately the Buttigieg came out where, in his view, I think for us, like, come on. Don't
it reminded me of when Beto said in the Vanity Fair article he was born for this, right? Every time I hear Pete talk, it reminds me of every time Mark Zuckerberg testifies in front of Congress. It's not even just like the context, and the content of it all. It's just like the arrogance, how I feel like he's talking down to me. Almost he's very similar to how Bernie talks, only Bernie is screaming at you, right? It's a level of superiority of like, I know best, and if you don't support me, there's something wrong with you.
Well, there were articles in Politico from about in the summer that showed in 2011 when Mayor Pete won in South Bend, he had actually very good support among African Americans. By 2015, he won re-election, but in certain black districts, he lost by clear. And this is just an article I'm reporting from what I read, folks, from local people who said he made you feel like he was the smartest person in the room. He knew he was the smartest person in the room. And if you disagreed, you were wrong.
Yep.
You had to be wrong and he had to be right. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the Harvard guys I knew. But they would say it with a smile. And I'm trying to be honest, they were not bad human beings. They weren't dicks. They were like, they were little frat boys. Some of them, I don't think Mayor Pete's like that. But you got, and that's the feeling I've gotten from him. And if he became the nominee, I'd work 150%. And I could be wrong. If people know Mayor Pete and want to call and go like, I know the guy. Great guy. I mean, he's a minority. I mean,
I'm going to believe what local people said. And if they came to the same conclusion as me, as somebody who's just viewing him on TV, I'm going to run with that.
The interview from the summer, the political article, which I found today, which was the one about, it was July 8th, on how he lost black support over 4 years in South Bend, was what caught my eye because someone had tweeted that over the weekend. Although I know who tweeted it, was Julian Castro's
because he was
press
supposed to,
spokesman.
because he I think Pete challenged Julio to come to South Bend and walk the streets with him, and someone his press person retweeted and said, well, you actually you lost support and you're losing it.
I
that
think
was pretty interesting.
When Pete said to Beto, I don't need lessons from you in anything on the debate stage, it was like, that could go either way. That could play well or play like, and I'm not trying to create a media narrative about him. I don't have that power, first of all. If I did, I would create a lot of narratives. I'd create a lot of other narratives, like really good ones. But I'm not trying to create a media narrative that he is. Because look, to be blunt, there was with Obama a sense of, he wasn't elitist. He didn't come from that. But an academic snootiness at times, like a professorial detachment. Mm-hmm. But it was offset by everything else about him.
And it was offset that his wife was pretty awesome. And she and his family softened him a little bit, I think.
Well, it wasn't like when you read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, it seemed that the real thing with Barack, and I don't know him, I'm just reading the book. I mean,
she knows him, so I think
she was saying that he was really enjoyed his alone time so much. Like he just liked to come home and read alone and stuff. And that can translate, because if you like your alone time, it can translate as you're not the most social person, but you're pushed into a world of the ultimate social thing. You've got to talk to everyone all the time. But you've met him?
I've met him, yeah.
So when we used to hang out, me and Barack.
We homies.
No, when I met him, one time we had a meeting. It was me and 10 Muslim American leaders. It was like for an hour in a room. And he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, it was him, and it was like Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes, and he was there, and we had a really good conversation, and he was great. So, and that's the thing. Like if I never had met him, it would be different. But I didn't meet him. I got invited to the holiday party at the White House because I knew someone in the White House.
Turn up.
So it was the coolest thing.
Hashtag turn up.
So him and his wife stood there for like 3 hours to take a picture with everyone. That was their entire holiday party. And you get like 30 seconds. And I joked around with him for like 30, and he laughed. I'm like, what a great guy. Yeah. And
you wanted to have a beer with him, right?
I don't drink beer, but yes, I would have. At the time, I would have had a white wine. I don't drink any alcohol. At the time, I was still drinking white wine. But no, but I wonder. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want to be unfair to Mayor Pete. Like, maybe it's someone, if you get to talk to him and you go, he's certainly impressive and certainly smart, and he's moving up in the polls, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in states. Iowa, New Hampshire is 90-something% white. Yeah. I mean, he's going to be reckoned with.
He's able to pull his people who look like him.
Do you have problems with him?
Do I have problems with him? I'm just not convinced by him. I think here's
a Buttigieg supporter who's, I think, upset with him. And I know that sounds, Jim's calling me out. He's right. It is arrogant, and I was trying to be nice about it. Jim from Arizona is saying you're right. It is out of character because I'm just sharing my view. I don't dislike Mayor Pete. I'm just sharing my view. And that's why I said I didn't want it to be a media. I'm not trying to create a media narrative that Mayor Pete is elitist or anything.
I think he's incredibly impressive. Right?
Oh, I think so.
No one disagrees with that.
Right. I think so.
And I think that he's got a lot to offer this country. And I think ideally, my dream for America to recover from the Trump years is this. Eamon Klobuchar at the top of the ticket, Pete Buttigieg as vice president. They serve for 8 years, after which Pete Buttigieg becomes president for 8 years.
No.
Well, that would be hard to do, but I'm just saying because a win for back-to-back for a Democrat, any party to do that. But what you like Klobuchar, so that's funny. Did you like her before the last debate? Because she did really well, objectively speaking. She jumped.
I've liked her I liked her from her moment with Kavanaugh. That's when I first really.
Interesting.
So that's not my version of America.
So Jeremiah.
Well, I would love it. I would love for Pete to have, to be have some sort of minority credentials, so that that part of his candidacy could go down a little bit more smoothly. But I think that.
Well, he is a minority. I mean, he is gay, and he's the first gay male to be. He's a top tier candidate for president that we know of. I mean, there could have been someone else who's bisexual or something. We didn't.
Right, and ironically, I think that's really hurting him with black people who are, I don't know enough black people to be able to speak authoritatively.
Jameer knows a lot of black people. Jameer, you've met a few black people.
But the information I'm getting from my TV set is that black people generally are having a problem with it.
Oh, it's on now. All right, but by the way, quick thing, Jim.
That's literally what I just said.
Congressman Claiborne was on today, Jim Claiborne, and said that there are some black people. I will be honest, there's going to be some Muslim people who are not me, of course, but in my community, we're barely around polling 50% support marriage equality. So we're getting there. The younger Muslims, probably fine. Older ones, immigrant Muslims, probably more challenging. Right-wing Christians, evangelical, the whitest people ever, are not going to like Buttigieg just because he's gay.
It's religious people across the board. It's not more inherently black folks, more inherently white folks.
I'm a really hardcore atheist, so I mean, I'm not. Pete Buttigieg is not thrilling me with his Christian creds. However, I think that I'm overall pleased that he is Christian because it gives him a certain amount of invulnerability where typically our side would have some vulnerability, and it allows him to do things like attack Pence and get some headlines for doing it.
That's true. But Jim, no, you're right. Here's my main point. If I can only just say one more thing, this is it. Sure.
I'm really, really distressed and upset to see people kind of disqualifying Pete Buttigieg right at the outset when he has so much to offer. I'm
not disqualifying him, and we shouldn't. And I think
there are voices that are though.
Sure.
And I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think there's a large enough field for people to look at the spectrum and decide whether or not they feel like someone has beyond his. I mean, he has a great resume. Like no one's denying that he is qualified to do something. But I think a lot of people who are trying to think how we recover from a Trump presidency are not looking for Pete or think that Pete has the chops to be able to do so. And I think that's not a bad thing. I think that this is a time where we have enough candidates for us to have that debate on what qualifies someone to run this country other than a reality celebrity.
I think that compared to Pete, all of the other candidates are a big step down in quality. I just think he's head.
You don't even want him on top of the ticket, though. How do you say that? It's so funny. You wanted Amy Klobuchar. Why would you want the inferior candidate to be second in your view? That's
and
weird.
Also, does it make sense?
Because he's a mayor and she's a senator. Because he's a woman and she's a man.
But you're talking about Pete as being the most qualified person to be president of the United States. He has run a small city, not even a large city, a small city government.
The fourth biggest in Indiana.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very
the fourth biggest,
small economy. I know student government presidents of colleges that have managed larger student bodies than he has. And so I think if we're talking about qualifications, I think he's lacking in that area, especially around foreign policy.
Look, we got to go to break. Jim, but fair point, my friend. And I have nothing against Mayor Pete. If he's a nominee, I'll work 150% for him. And he's moving up in the polls. I've got to be honest. So he could end up. I was thinking the other day he could end up being the nominee, just like any of the top tier. It's unlikely, but then again, it's unlikely almost anyone becomes a nominee, and that our polling is so soft, according to Iowa, where almost 3/4 of the voters said they'll change their mind. Anything can happen. We've got 3 months. So, all right, Jim, thanks for the call. By the way, right behind you is. Jameer, behind you is a Trump rally, and his supporters are not just white, they're wearing white shirts. So, they're like white on white. They're just missing a hood. I mean, they're literally just missing a hood.
What creepy shit is this?
The shirts that they're wearing at the Trump rally in Kentucky right now says, read the transcript.
Man behind him?
He's found a black guy and 2 brown people, but everyone else is white. They're literally just missing a hood he has them dressed in white with the words, read the transcript on it, which I call it the confession. Read the confession. I'm with you, folks. Read the confession. It's not a transcript. Remember, it is a confession. Let's take a break and come back with more Jameer Berlin. We'll probably take some calls as well. You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, where we crush Trump's lies every single day.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here Monday, November 4th, and we're chatting with our friend Jamira Burley, she does everything, social justice advocate, next-gen social impact consultant, guest host here, worked on the Clinton campaign. So, in response, clapback by Kamala Harris. That's the right way of putting it?
That's a good way. Okay, let me find out you hip into the game.
Here is Kamala Harris talking about, I learned it all from Joy Reid. We'll be on her show on Like It's Your Play Club. Here, responding to Mayor Pete saying it's a two-way race. Clip number 7, please.
There were some curious comments by Mayor Pete Buttigieg this weekend. He's trying to suggest now that this is becoming a two-person race between him and Senator Warren.
Well, I think that's just it's naive for him to think that at this point. The fate of this election has been determined. Just look at history. You might need to review past elections to know that what's happening right now is not necessarily determinative of the outcome.
So what's your reaction? What was that?
I think like most people, it's hilarious when you first hear it because it's arrogant for him to say. I don't think anyone, even Warren, is saying this is a me race. And so, yeah, I think it's her becoming much more personable, and I think it makes her more likable.
Do you think, she had a big spike obviously after the first debate with Biden, and she slid down and she seems stuck at 4 or 5%. When you look at her, do you think there's a chance she could break out, or do you think that mold is cast with her?
I think she could. I think she is a progressive, but also has some moderate views that makes a lot of more traditional Democrats comfortable, especially when you have Wall Street now full out attacking Elizabeth Warren and attacking the most progressive of the candidates. And so I do think that she can pull a consensus of folks who are in the middle who might be moderates, generally moderates on both sides, as well as getting hardcore Democrats who are looking for a change. I think she has a pretty diverse background. I think the thing that's going to trip her up, especially with Black folks, is her criminal justice record. And she has to be able to draw the balance between saying that she's qualified to be able to handle a person like Donald Trump and his record and hold him accountable, while also recognizing that some of her previous policies have actually been harmful to Black and brown communities. And there's nuances to that. Right. And I think debates are the wrong place to get into those nuances as someone who's well read about her record. But I do think until she find ways to have those very out-front conversations with more folks, it's going to continue to hold her back.
I had Julian Castro on last week, and I asked him the question because it was prompted by a New York Times article, which talked about the diversity of the Democratic Party. He's actually quoted it. Yet the top 4 candidates now are all white. Yeah. Yet when you look at who voted for us in 2016, it was over 90% of African Americans voted for us, over almost 70% of Latinos, about 63, 64%, depending on what kind of polling. And of white people, it was like around 40% or something. Now, there are more white people. Yeah. So, the percentages are misleading in a way because there's more white people in this country, 75%. But Julian had his view about why there is no white person at the top. And
why there's no person of color.
Why there's no person of color, and why they're not even getting traction in a way. I mean, to me, I expected Cory Booker and Senator Harris to be doing better. I'm really surprised. And Julian, too. I mean, all 3, to be blunt. Is there a 4th person of color I'm missing? No, Beto almost, but he wasn't.
Is Tulsi?
Tulsi Gabbard, technically of color. And she's doing okay, but what is your view on why do you think that no one of color is in the top tier?
Well, I can totally get why people don't like Cory. I think I can totally get that. I think Harris not only is a woman of color, but also is a woman. And so we never talked about that during 2016 and how that impacted Hillary Clinton, the misogyny within this country. And I think that plays a role. I think there are a lot of nuances, particularly about Harris. Many people, I've been in random conversations with folks and they're like, she's a cop. And I'm like, do you even know her record? Like, honestly, do you know her record?
She's a cop, wow.
Yeah, but there are moments within her career that people are using to pinpoint and say that this is who she is because she hasn't been able to show a well-rounded narrative of who she is and have those deeper conversations. And I also think that for a lot of people, it's easier for us to point to white folks or to expect white people to be at the top of the ticket just because that's how it's always ever been. And so I think even with Barack Obama, he didn't get a large percentage of the Black vote until after he started winning some states and people saw that it was possible. And so I think that is still very much true for a lot of people of color, is that a part of us want to play it safe
Right.
While also hopefully getting a relatively progressive candidate.
You know, hey Matt, do you have the clip Friday of Secretary Castro, which I made shorter, of his answer why? Because we played it because it actually got some press. I got picked up in a few publications of why, and he almost went the next step, but he is very measured.
Yeah, he's very
you got the
measured.
shorter version. So let's hear Secretary Castro from my show from last week.
I don't take anything away from the people right now that are leading the pack. I mean, they've worked very hard. They're great, talented candidates. I can see why folks are behind them. At the same time, I do think that we should be proud that we have a very diverse field of people. And what I've always just asked for is that people give me a fair hearing. And I think generally when I've gotten out to Iowa, New Hampshire, other places, that folks generally are doing that. But there's also this anxiety among a lot of Democrats today, and that this thought that the best way to beat Donald Trump is the safe route. Right. And they equate that with a certain profile of candidate. What I think actually is that we need to do what the last successful Democrat did, who was Barack Obama, which is to ignite this young, diverse coalition of working class people and people across the country that are going to get off the sidelines and into the voting booth. So the last example we have of winning was not the model that a lot of voters right now are thinking is the way they're going to go in 2020. But I think we should actually turn that conventional wisdom on its head.
So he was saying the safe route, and he said a certain profile. What he's getting at is white, because people think the best way to beat Donald Trump. And there are people who would probably want, and I would have to say, honestly, a white man, because I can give you the New York Times today. This is stunning. The New York Times today did polling in a bunch of swing states, battlegrounds, I should say. And of Democrats, they asked here 40% of voters who support Mr. Biden, and this is not a slap on Biden, this is about Democrats. 41% of voters who support Biden say they agree with the statement that most of the women who run for president, quote, just aren't that likable. So you've got 40% of these people, and I don't know how many are women or men, it wasn't broken down, and the New York Times insightfully adds, bolstering concerns among some Democrats that sexism could be a burden on a candidate. So when you're looking at the profile, if Secretary Castro is right, people are going to go to the white guy because they want to get Trump out. We all want Trump out. Number one thing, who's going to beat Trump? What makes you electable?
Yeah.
And is it poll numbers now which shows beating Trump, or is it the sense of like, look, I like Warren, or I like Kamala, or I like this other person, but the white guy is probably the best way, the safest way to go.
I mean, we're all dealing with our own internal biases, whether you're a person of color or not, right? Where you have been programmed into you of which you view as strength and someone who's beatable and someone who has previously won. I think the only thing I disagree with Castro is that the difference between Barack Obama is that he was working to some extent with a clean slate, right? There had never been a person of color being president or winning the nomination. What's different now is that millennials have now lived through two Obama terms where he was great, but also people felt disappointed in many ways. And now they've also lived through Trump. And this is an entire generation that is doing worse than every previous generation that they've had. So there is also a fatigue that we're now dealing with millennials and Gen Zers who I think there's a level of hope, but also there's a level of caution because they now are raising families. They now are dealing with student debt, and we're dealing with the repercussions of what Trump has done for the last 2 years. And I think most people just want us to win, while there's still progressive young people who are working on these campaigns that are going to try to get people out. Like all the progressive people of color that was on Hillary campaign are with Warren.
Oh, they are.
They are working on Warren's campaign. They're working on Castro's campaign. They're working on Harris's campaign. And so they believe that it's possible. I think the vast majority of Americans need to see them start winning some states first before they can back them up.
And you touched on something I didn't think about, although I have nieces who are I guess, on the edge of millennial, the oldest one. But the idea of growing up with a black president. So any kind of inherent excitement about the first of that is gone.
Yeah.
You've had one for 2 terms. You got reelected. I don't know just psychologically how that impacts people, because does it make any kind of inherent, I guess excitement's the only word I can think of a Cory Booker, like it doesn't exist or something, because it's got to just be at this point, okay, we had a black person. And Cory's interviewed in the article in the New York Times, and he's heard to some people saying to him, well, we had a black president. I'm not sure if America's ready for a second. I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. But it's more about the candidate.
But since the beginning of Cory Booker career, people have always compared him to Barack Obama. And the problem he finds now is that he's just not living up to the expectation of it. And so the excitement isn't there, yes. But also I think that many people are, that same excitement for Barack Obama didn't, for some extent it did roll over to Hillary Clinton. But I think people are just exhausted. I mean, they're excited. They want change, but I think it's more of a scaredness than it was during Barack Obama, where there was a level of excitement about things to come. And now it's just like things that we're trying to protect ourselves from.
I recall being on election eve in New Hampshire last primary for Democrats in 2016 and being at University of New Hampshire. We did our show live from there. It was on another channel, Insight. But we talked to a lot of college students. And I talked to these young women who were college students who were all for Bernie. And I go... And I was just curious, like, are you interested at all the fact that you might have a first woman president? And they go, yeah, we want a woman president. We'll have one. Like, sort of like, because Obama had shattered the white man thing, everything is possible. So there's no need to make a desperation if you don't like. And the point was, they were not going to compromise for Hillary from their more progressive views because it was just a woman. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting because I didn't think about it. I thought they'd be more excited. I learn all the time. I mean, if there was a Muslim candidate who was good running, I'd be so excited. I was like, oh my gosh. But for them, they're like, no, there'll be a woman president, no big deal. Just she's not the one for me. So I guess that as you're a millennial, you see this too. There's not, if you're older, you might be more excited. You might be like, this might be my only shot in my life to see a female president, let's say, or someone thinking that.
Yes and no. I mean, Hillary's entire campaign was made up of young women from all over the country who had left their jobs, dropped out of school to work on her campaign. So I definitely think there is still excitement there. I think there is a level of misogyny that we have yet to drill into, even with women. I remember meeting some women on the campaign who was like, she's not strong enough. Or they were, because they had stayed at home and were housewives, didn't think that a woman should be at that level of power and didn't think that her PMSing would allow her to be not emotional. So I think that we all are dealing with like these inherited flaws that allows us to think what is possible in this country. And while there also are people who had valid points about not liking her at the same time. So, but I also think that criticism doesn't hold up when you think about the things that they criticize Hillary for are the same things they didn't criticize Bernie for. Right? The crime act of the 90s, right. All of those things.
And in the SNL clip I played, Liz Warren, played by Kate McKinnon, was saying, hey, when Bernie was talking about Medicare for all, no one pressed him for how are you going to pay for this? Like, no one did it all.
Because if a man does it, it's very different than if a woman does it. You're not held to the same standards.
Mom's going to answer all the questions. I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
And all right, let's take a break. We'll come back. All the phone lines are lit up. We'll take a call or two, bring you into the conversation here with our friend. You're laughing? What was it?
Who was that? What's his name?
Jim
Didn't he run
Clyburn.
for president? Yeah.
And he was the one that said that he thinks some black people have a problem with Buttigieg. So it's created a whole media thing where it's unfair to the African American community to make it seem that the community is homophobic.
The whole community.
It's religious people who have a view on how your life should live, and if you don't do it, they're going to reject you and not vote for you. It's ridiculous. I'm a person of faith, but I do not want any of that to apply. It's about their issues and what they stand for, and that's why you should vote for or against anyone. Let's take a break. Come back. We'll take some calls with friend Jamira Burley.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
to the Dean Obidala Show on SiriusXM Progress.
And welcome back to the Dean Obidala Show. We're live here with Jameer Burley. A lot of stuff going on. All right, here's Nick from South Bend, from Mayor Pete's town. Hey, Nick, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. How you doing, Dean? Love the show. You're part of my post-workout every night.
Yes.
But I gotta say, you triggered me a little bit with the Mayor Pete's.
You're from South Bend, Nick?
Not originally, but I am from Indiana. I live in South Bend for work now.
Oh, okay. So you live there. So what do you tell us? I'm all ears. I'm not anti-Mayor Pete at all. I was sharing my view, and I even framed it by the idea about I could be wrong, and I want to be wrong because I find him impressive. I'm just telling you the air I get from him. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really boils down to I've been listening to your conversation on the phone, and I think it really boils down to, for me, kind of this question of, because I do see Pete as somebody who can bring in people from the center that might vote either way to our side of the ballot. And it really boils down to this question for me that I struggle with is, do you think we're in a better position voting for a centrist, a Joe Biden or a Pete that's going to try and pull more people from the center over, or should we just double down on all of our progressive policies and say we're not going to hold any punches, we're going to pull everything back. If there's people in the center that don't want to get on board with that, that's fine. We're still the majority. We just have to push out the numbers to the ballot box. That's my biggest fear with 2020, and I don't know what the better option is.
I actually hear you on that, and I think that is a strategy question, right? Which one is more winnable, regardless of what candidate we actually have as a nominee? I think what I struggle with is that the Republican Party never thinks about that, right? They're like, we double down on our base. Right. We are very honest about our priorities and our roles, and I think at such a time where it's so the division is widening in so many ways that it hurts Democratic candidates when they appear to be more catering to a potential Trump escapee versus or a Republican escapee versus actually creating policy that the majority of your base actually support.
And I agree, because I feel like sometimes there's this, what have you done for me lately, coming from the centrists? Show me what you can do for me. And then we compromise on so many issues. And then when it finally gets to the ballot box, they're just like, it wasn't good enough. And then we'll vote for someone else. And Nick,
I want candidates. When someone's running for president, they're giving us their vision of what they would do as president. We understand that when they get in there, they're not a king or a queen, and they have to compromise with Congress, and things have to happen. But I want an aspirational message that inspires me. One that says we're going to try to transform things for the better because America needs to take big steps forward, not little teeny steps, big ones. And I know they're going to get in there and they might not be able to do all the big steps, but I want to hear their vision for the country. To me, the least impressive, exciting thing is saying, hey, we're going to go back to the days before Trump where things are calmer and I won't tweet as much and we'll have a little incremental change. That's the least exciting. If someone like that gets a nominee, I will work 150% for them. I'm just saying, from what I've seen in comparing 2008, 12, and 16 is when the candidate inspires people more, people come out and knock on the doors, make the phone calls, do all the things they're supposed to do.
Definitely. And I lean towards that as much as I am that I'm much more centrist, kind of can see both sides of growing up in a more conservative state in Indiana. I am just so sick and tired of compromising and trying to beg people to understand that it's in their best interest to support more democratic and progressive policies. That I'm almost at the point now, let's just go full Bernie Warren and just push people
balls to the wall.
That's where we're going. I mean, if you add up Bernie and Warren's support now in the primary, in the beginning it was not eclipsing Joe Biden. Now it is far eclipsing Joe Biden. So the more progressive wing is the biggest component of I'm not saying it's a majority, but if you add them together, it's almost 50%, and that makes sense. That's what the estimates are, and I think you got to go big or go home. Go bold. Tell
the world what we stand for.
Right, let's be blunt. America's not working for so many people. It's not left-right thing.
It's not even working for poor white people.
Right. It's what I'm saying. Like, it's not left-right. There's so many people who this country is not working well for them. And they're seeing the same thing we are, that the wealthy are getting wealthier. The middle class is staying about the same. We're getting little increments. The lower class, there's no more social mobility. We're like a Dickens novel at this point. It's like ridiculous. They got to hope for the prince and the pauper type of thing. They move up in this world. And that's the reality of this nation we live in now. And you watch people give literally $1 million contribution that's legal to an inaugural committee and become an ambassador. And you go, that's our system? That's the way it's going to work? And it goes down the line from healthcare to criminal justice reform to student loans to climate change. We're getting out of the Paris Accord formally. The announcement was today by Trump. You're like, we're going backwards. And Jamir, you're absolutely right. The Republicans never apologize for double and tripling down. Look what they're doing on healthcare with women's rights. They're going further every day. Alabama, Mississippi.
They threw their entire values out the window to continue to support Trump. Like, they're only doubling
Christian
down.
Sharia. It's coming. They're not even embarrassed. They want to turn the Bible into American law. They're not embarrassed by that. That's what they believe in. Mm-hmm. So it's about time we do the same thing.
Show the world what we stand for, because as of now, they're confused as much as I'm confused.
I love it. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it, my friend. Matt, do I have one more break? I've got one more. Let's take our last break. They're shorter now, and I'm not used to they're so short I can't even remember them. Be right back with more from Jamir Burley, and we'll try to take some calls to 866-997-4748.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And now, more of the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM's Progress.
Very misogynistic.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live here Monday, November 4th. Our friend Jamira Burley's here. And many times I was talking at break to Jamira, we talk about racism and how to address it to the core and have these conversations that are often uncomfortable. What we don't talk a lot about is the genesis of misogyny in our society. And that new poll today, which showed 41% of Biden supporters just don't think a female candidate running for president is likable. Not likable enough type of thing, which is off the charts. And we've never discussed this, like the genesis of misogyny in this country and how it permeates black, white, brown. Yeah. It's all over the place. Any idea? I have no clue. Any ideas how do you address it in a positive way?
What I will say, after the 2016 election, there was a really great video that was produced by Vice, and it was around the fact that the entire structure of running for office, not just president, is all catering towards the attributions of men, right? And so because women didn't run for so long, right? And so the fact that even the idea of how people view their likable candidates, like, do I want to get a beer with them? Most Americans are not going to see that in a woman president. Is that, do they want to get a beer with Hillary? Do they want to get a beer with Warren? Even though I think getting shots with Warren would be freaking hilarious. So I think that we are in a time where women have never been seen as strong. Prime example of when that happened and you saw a spike in their polls was Harris. When she came very strongly for Donald Trump during one of the debates, she received a spike, but then she fell right back down. So I think we are dealing in a time where so many people just don't see women candidates as strong, don't see women candidates as likable, because they don't want to hang out with their mother. They don't want to hang out with, no, seriously, they don't want to hang out with someone who seems like an authority figure that happens to also be a woman. And I think for women, voters oftentimes don't see themselves as strong. And so it's hard for them to picture another woman being as strong because of the values we've been taught for so long.
I remember during the 2016, I would hear comedians joke and people joke around, guys say things like, older guys like, oh, Hillary reminds me of my first wife or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole sense of that. And I'm like, I would laugh it off, but I imagine for some of them, it had an impact on how they voted. And
too strong seems too masculine for them.
So, I mean, is it just part of our society? Because I've tried to talk about where if people of religion are, if you want to look at any of the three books, the Abrahamic faith books, there are things that are really not good about women. They're really putting women down. Old Testament, New Testament. New Testament the least, the Quran and Old Testament the most. But New Testament does have, like in Timothy, a woman should learn in silence. And if you believe in the Bible literally, you're going to believe that. And you can try to explain it away, but it's in there. And Jody Heiss is a member of Congress and was asked, should women run for Congress? He used to be a reverend. He said, if they get the permission of their husband, I don't see a problem. He's in Congress now, folks, and he's not like 75. He's in his 40s.
That's what I mean.
So, and no one went like, what? No, he won.
Yeah.
So the point is, it's everywhere. It's like water, misogyny. And I don't know.
Even on how the media portrays these candidates when they report about them. It's every single aspect. But we have to continue to call it out and recognize that these are the key way. It's the only way.
Jamera Burley said, call it out. We're going to call out misogyny like we call out racism. We got all the isms. You got to get rid of them, my friend. Jamera, people follow you on Twitter. What's your Twitter?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Jamera Burley. And I'll be on BBC tomorrow morning talking about the election.
What time?
8 a.m. 8:30.
8:30 BBC. Check out our friend Jamera. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it.
No problem.
When we come back, Chris Liu is going to join us, one of President Obama's longest serving aides. He worked with him when he was in the Senate, then was Deputy Secretary of Labor. He'll be joining us right after this break.
The future of progressive radio. This is the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back to the Obadala Show. We're live right here Monday. I'm typing at the same time, trying to line up our guest, Monday, November 4th. And right now, very happy to welcome back to the show. It is our friend Chris Liu. He was President Obama's longest-serving aide. He served with him in the U.S. Senate, then in the White House, and was Deputy Secretary of Labor at one point. Chris, how are you, my friend?
Dean, good to be on again.
Chris, there's too much to talk about. I'm losing my mind. I'm literally typing about craziness, tweeting crazy stuff about the transcript, about what happened today and everything, during the commercial breaks. This is my life. So, Chris, let me ask you a couple questions here about the testimony. I went through some of it earlier today, Marie Yovanovitch, and that here's the crazy part. She testified that the State Department called Sean Hannity to check facts on some of the smear against her. How often did the Obama White House call Rachel Maddow to check on facts? That happened a lot when you were in the Obama administration.
I was trying to figure out what the closest analogy was, and that's probably it. Like that we had this, Obama and Maddow had a evening conversation about what foreign policy should be. That was then parroted on Maddow's show, and then Obama would say it in the White House, and it would be confirmed we watched on TV. I mean, look, there were many troubling things that came out of today's deposition release, but that was one of just the more bizarre. And I think we will see this theme of Sean Hannity being involved in foreign policy playing out as these other depositions are released.
Why, at this point, why not? I mean, and by the way, I'm looking at the actual testimony. Adam Schiff questioned Yovanovitch, and she said, what I was told by Phil Reeker was that the secretary, or perhaps somebody around him, she's referring to Pompeo, was going to place a call to Mr. Hannity on Fox News to say, what is going on? I mean, do you have proof of these allegations or not? If you have proof, tell me. And if not, stop. And talking about the smearing of her, the lies of Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump Jr., I covered that earlier in the show. And she said, I understand the call was made. So Schiff said, does it seem extraordinary to you the Secretary of State would call a talk show host to figure out whether you should be retained as an ambassador? So the actual words are like, I want to read this. This is just funniness. And she was like, well, they were asking if the criticism of me was true. Yes, she said. So some top official was going to find out what the basis of this Fox host attacking you for. And she's like, uh-huh. And did you ever get a readout? No, I didn't. Although I heard the call took place. So in the insane world that we live in of surrealness, you have even more of this. It's hard to make sense of what's going on because there are so many things that I don't know. Maybe we've seen before. Maybe I'm and I'm not being facetious here. Maybe there's certain things that I get worked up over, and that's why I try to read a lot of history. Like over the weekend, I read a lot about Nixon. I'm reading this great book called Impeachment, which talks about Andrew Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton's impeachment. So you have a historical context. And I did, in reading about Nixon, it was interesting that even with the articles of impeachment, after all of the Saturday Night Massacre, after everything else, still only a handful of Republicans voted for the first article of impeachment. And the third one, which was essentially obstruction, I think like 3 Republicans on the committee voted for it. So folks, it's not like these Republicans have never been beholden to their king, their leader, even while the person's committing crimes in front of all of us. This is what they're about. So it just seems, I think, because of news, what do you make of the fact that Yovanovitch testified, and I read the clip earlier, where she was concerned for her own safety because of the words of Donald Trump. She said that, because Trump said in his July 25th phone call about Yovanovitch, the former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, adding, she's going to go through some things. Yeah. And the staffer asked her, what did you understand that to mean? And she said, I don't know what it meant. I was very concerned. I still am. And the question, do you feel threatened? Yovanovitch, yes.
Well, and then there was the other part of the transcript where when she gets this phone call, I think at 1 a.m., and is essentially, I think, relieved of her duties at that point, and she's essentially told, hey, you better get her on a plane now because, your security may be at risk. And she tries to find out what that is and has no idea what that is either. I mean, look, there's this aspect of Donald Trump where he likes to bully, he likes to boast, he talks tough, And what's hard to figure out if that's simply hyperbole, which I suspect it is a lot of the time, but then you also wonder who ends up taking those words and acting it upon them. And so this may have been a case where Trump was just boasting, but somebody took it seriously on the other end of the line. But no one really knows, and obviously with multiple conversations, there were other people involved, and I think this will continue to come out as part of the investigation.
Maybe Parnas and Fruman.
Well, I mean, now that we know that Parnas may be cooperating, we may. That's sort of an interesting development this evening as well.
Right. When I look at Yovanovitch, and I made this case earlier in the show, and I hope I made it in a way that was understandable on radio, because it's different. If we had a TV show with like graphics, it would be very easy to make these points. I try to make the point, and Chris, I want to get your reflection on this. The Yovanovitch and her removal and the campaign to remove her, she seems to have sat at the intersection of something.
Yeah.
And there's something going on because the facts are clear from the indictment of Parnas and Fruman. They began their efforts in May and June of last summer, meeting with Congressman Pete Sessions and saying, we're going to raise money. And Sessions sends a letter to get rid of her, saying she's bad-mouthing the president. Then on the other side, in the new year, this year, we have Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump Jr. attacking her on Twitter by name, Fox News, and a drumbeat to get rid of her. And it seems with Parnas and Fruman, it may have been about financial interests, but clearly with Trump world, it's about the 2020 campaign. What do you make of this? I mean, she does. I think understanding why those two groups of people wanted her out might help.